everyone. I'm Luke Frazier, and this is ArtBeat, a series of conversations with artists and arts leaders. And we are honored today to be joined by Bonnie Clearwater. Welcome, Bonnie.
Oh, thank you, Luke. It's great to catch up with you.
Could you tell us a little about your current role?
Okay, I'm Director and Chief Curator of NSU Art Museum, Fort Lauderdale. We are part of Nova Southeastern University, but located downtown, really the gateway to Las Olas, along with Heisinger Park across the street.
Can you tell us a little bit about what makes NSU Art Museum so unique?
There's so many things that you need. First of all, we have a fabulous building. It was designed by the great modernist architect, especially for museums in the day. He was the architect of the day, Edward Larrabee Barnes. And it really was a museum designed with art in mind, that it really is a great flexible space that we do all kinds of exhibitions, and artists love showing there because it shows off their work so well. So that's one of the things that makes it unique. The other thing is that the museum was founded as a collecting museum. And consequently, over the years, it started in 1958. The current building opened in 86. It has developed one of the strongest collections, not only locally, but nationally, very unique collections, such as we recently became home to the entire Christo and Jean-Claude Surrounded Islands exhibition, documentary exhibition. And this is on view at our museum. No other museum in the world can show this project. We have it permanently. So there's a lot of unique things about our museum. The other thing is our location. It used to be Fort Lauderdale was considered the stepchild of Miami and Palm Beach, and now we're the center of everything. I had run a museum in Miami for 18 years, Mocha, North Miami, and really what we've done now is create this as the center and pull from the entire South Florida region, even across to Naples. We really see it as a museum for all of South Florida. We've built up an audience that reflects that, and the audience reflects the wide population of South Florida, which is something we're also very thrilled about. We make sure that everybody feels that they're at home at our museum. Very often find me sitting in the cafe having a meeting and just striking up a conversation like I just did this afternoon with two guys who were going crazy over one of the artworks. And we had a great conversation. They didn't even know I was the director. So it really is a welcoming place. We have a great auditorium. As you know, seats 256. So we have a lot of collaborations with our other cultural organizations, whether it's the music or dance. We have next week, there's going to be a discussion on a new play that's about the great Purvis Young, the artist from Miami. So lots of things go on. We really are a museum for artists. I see artists as our number one audience. We're dedicated to South Florida artists. We've consistently, even before my time, have made that one of the focuses of the museum. So we're very community oriented, and we see ourselves as an educational institution. Some museums consider it as an entertainment. I've always seen museums as education, and that can be education from preschoolers right to lifelong learning. So this is what makes us unique, and I see it in our community. I see people get it, love it, want to support it.
Do you remember your personal first experience with the museum and what moved you so much about it?
Well, yes, I do, because I was the director of art programs for a big art foundation that was based in LA, but also had a museum in Lake Worth. And it was a museum that supported contemporary art. And 1986 is when the new building opened, and I was invited for that opening. What really struck me was the sophistication. It was a great exhibition. And at that time, it was the museum for all region. There was international artists there, local artists. They had Lionel Hampton and his band playing at the opening. I'll never forget that. And the building itself was extraordinary. So it really hit me that this was big time. This was a major museum. So that was my first experience. And then my next experience was in 93. My husband and I had actually moved from LA to Miami in 90 to help make an art scene. We were brought in by some developers to get things going. I think we did a good job.
Yes.
And in 93, the museum reached out to us, to me, to curate an exhibition of South Florida artists. You know, all the collectors you know as the Miami collectors and were there. And one of them said, how come this isn't happening in Miami? And it was again, drove home the role that the museum in Fort Lauderdale could play for the whole region. So that was as a guest curator. And one of the artists that was in that exhibition, Onojide Shabaka, is in our current exhibition, called Close to Home, of South Florida artists. In fact, two of the works that were in that show in 93 are in this exhibition.
Now, speaking of you personally, what is your artistic background? How did you get involved in art to begin with?
I was born this way.
As many of us are.
Pictures of me painting in diapers at an easel. It was an art family, art music family, and very creative family. In fact, my great uncle was the foremost psychologist on the study of creativity. And I listened to a recent podcast about creativity, and I realized, gee, they haven't really gotten it much further than my uncle 40 years ago. And I was involved in these conversations. My father was a musician, his mother and my grandmother was an opera singer. The other side of the family was all artistic. My mother's other great uncle was one of the original madmen at McCann Erickson. He had the Buick account. He's the one that turned Esso to Exxon. The Tigers changed its stripes. So it was a very creative and environment in New York, third generation Bronx. And grew up in the suburbs, but it was Rockland County, which was really the headquarters for all the arts. Like my father headed the Arts Foundation, one of the first regional arts foundations. So I grew up going to John Cage concerts, all kinds of events. I got to meet and work with John Cage later as a curator with Merce Cunningham. And so it was very interesting. But the interesting thing is, it was my second grade teacher that alerted my parents that I should be getting additional art. And I consequently, thought about this. If a family that is artistic and supports the arts didn't recognize that, what would happen to a child that was in a family that didn't have that opportunity? That's why I guess I'm such a champion of making sure as many thousands and thousands of kids are getting access to the arts at our museum and getting the opportunity to make art at our museum.
Now, what would you say is the biggest difference before you came to NSU to your tenure at NSU? What has changed the most?
Well, they had several different directors. They had great boards, very knowledgeable boards. In fact, the reason, every time they had a change in directors, I was like saying, you're coming here. And it was really due to the artist, Francie Bishop Good, and her husband, David Horvitz, major collectors. They wouldn't take no for an answer. And there's been interesting programs here, depending on who was here. And there were different perspectives.
Yeah.
I think, as I said, the opening show here was amazing. It was by famous curator Sam Hunter, brought in it was called the American Renaissance, the major contemporary artists. And I think that I'm probably more aligned with that. But let's not forget Tut. It was probably the exhibition that put the museum on the map way before my time. And I think the fact that the museum is not just contemporary, we could really be whatever we want or we see need for in the community. I also emphasize scholarship. And we publish major books with our exhibitions, and also the curatorial team and education team I brought in is all very scholarly. I think one of the real differences, and it's a philosophy I had at the previous museum at MoCA Miami, that we organize almost all of our own shows. So instead of being an institution that is a receiver of culture from elsewhere and art history from elsewhere, we're making art history from our perspective. We're making a contribution to art history with a unique perspective. And I think that that might be the biggest difference from before.
One of the biggest questions I get in my line of work as a conductor is, what does a conductor do? They see what we do or they know the word. And I think, interestingly enough, curator is another word that many people, the average public, may not truly understand what that word means. Can you share what curator means to you personally?
Well, I should mention those. My father was a conductor. After a stint with Jack Parr on the Tonight Show, and family came along, he went into teaching, and I must have been 4 years old, and he was conducting his band and practice, and he asked me to come up to the podium and conduct, and I knew then that's what I could want to do. I love being able to say, okay, you do this and you do that, and bring it all together. So, it really is to bring a vision to the institution. There's just so many aspects of it. It's building a team. We have wonderful people working at the museum, creative. I like everyone having their own way of doing things as long as it works and is in budget. So we have very creative people, and I also like picking new talent. So, for instance, being part of NOVA, Southeastern University, we have federal work study students and interns, and there was one student who's been with us 2 years as a work study student in the curatorial department. I'd run into her at openings at obscure galleries. And in fact, if I didn't show up in an opening, she'd text me, "Where are you?" And we would share ideas. So when it came to this newest exhibition, the Close to Home, about drawing from social interaction, family, relationships, honoring ancestors, I saw this sort of bubbling up, and I asked the student, Sanaya Rivera, have you been noticing this? And she said, yes. I said, well, let's do a show. And I invited her along with our curator, Ariel Wollens, to co-curate the show together. And she just really impressed me. And although she hadn't planned on being a curator, she realized she found her passion. So what I like is finding that talent, encouraging it. I can name countless professionals who are out in the field, not only in South Florida, but New York and elsewhere, that got their start at either MoCA or before or here. And I'm very proud of that. Getting the community and the donors to be supportive of this too. In many cases, we're showing artists that nobody knows, but the important thing was to get everyone to realize that even if you don't know them now, you will. And that's part of the excitement, is coming here and finding someone new, or even if it's an artist you know really well or thought you did, like Frank Stella, to reposition. That is really important. Working with artists is something I've always loved. I was an artist. In fact, my husband was pulling out, I hid away my early work, and he was putting it out, and he says, now I want these out here. My biggest fan.
Now, what do you collect?
Nothing.
You don't collect anything?
No, because I might be a dinosaur, but I truly believe it's important for the public and our donors to know that if I'm picking an artist or showing an artist, it's without any benefit.
Yeah,
or even the potential of someone thinking that it's I had other reasons.
An impartial judge. Yeah.
I'd always argue with my history professor. Yes, I do believe in objective history, and I do try to be as objective as possible when I'm judging works.
Now, from your unique perspective, if you're running a museum that is not just a contemporary art museum, what is the healthy balance of contemporary versus non-contemporary art?
Yeah, well,
Or how do you think about that?
because I was originally a medievalist. So it's not hard for me at all. In fact, some of the best known modern curators were medievalists, including Alfred Barr, who was the first director of the Museum of Modern Art. It's not a wide stretch because the methodology that we use in medieval really was much more adaptable to contemporary than any of the other training, which was more, until recently, more about formalism, whereas medieval was about understanding the art within the context of the time. And that meant knowing the religion, the history, the culture, just the way people moved, all of that, that a manuscript could be moved from Paris to England or to Germany and trace how it influenced one artist, the different workshops. So probably it's why my specialty was Hiberno-Saxon interlacing, which is the Irish 8th and 9th century. Probably why I understood Frank Stella so well, because Frank Stella's major in Princeton was early Christian art, and particularly he wrote his senior thesis on Jackson Pollock and Hiberno-Saxon interlace, and I understood it perfectly. There is always this connection with the past. It's our collections. Our collections are diverse and in depth, so it's really our collections that drive our exhibitions, that somehow or other they relate to it. And I can find a way to relate in many different ways. In many cases, it's what I'm thinking about in relation to it, or somebody else coming up and did you know? Or same thing with our curator, Ariella Mullins, saying that she is interested in exploring this in relation to something core to our collection. So there is a rhyme and reason to what we do. It does all connect. And what's good about it is we built an audience that is a repeat audience. And consequently, the thing I love the most is when they see a new show and say, oh, this is like what so-and-so did here, and this connects, and it's like, oh, you got it.
They follow the thread.
They can follow the thread.
Do you think there is a commonality in the South Florida art scene in visual artists that are creating art today?
I would say that this is, again, another exciting period in South Florida. Right now, I don't know if you follow the art world, which in most cases means the art market. There's a lot of doom and gloom. The big international galleries realizing it's not sustainable and having to basically go back to basics. But what has defined this period, and even earlier periods like early 90s, I relate it to the early 90s in South Florida, there's a freedom in the work. It's not an academic development. There's a more organic, thoughtful process. And you can actually have a community here. There's a concentration of artists that are supporting each other, encouraging each other, not waiting for anyone to give them a show, finding a space and doing it. There's a real underground scene now. And then one of the interesting things, so there's like spaces like Tunnel, which is literally an underground scene. It's a sort of rundown strip mall in Little Havana, and there's actually a subterranean parking lot there that the artists have taken over for their studio spaces and exhibitions and performances, which is really important for artists to have this sense of being together and learning from each other. And, one artist gets a curator's coming, oh, you should go see that one or that one. It's so key. And it's really hard now in places like New York, with the rents, LA is also so spread out, and it's really, there's a lot of emphasis on what school you went to. It's hard to break into LA unless you went to one of the main art schools. And there's just a freedom that's happening, thoughtful work, and it's all different kinds. The other thing that I'm now documenting is, and it came out of this exhibition, The Close to Home of the South Florida artist, that's on view now, is when we say South Florida, they're thinking Miami, they're thinking urban, Miami Beach. Well, think West Kendall, think Plantation and Pinecrest, West Broward. What we're finding is these communities of artists who, growing up kind of isolated, had real access to what was happening in art, finding their own tribe and wanting to be different, finding each other, and it's multidisciplinary. So you would have an artist, skateboarders, punk, Metallica, graffiti, all together, and as friends, supporters, co-creators. And this has continued into their 20s and early 30s. And a number of the artists are in this exhibition. And I thought that was really interesting, because that's basically how I grew up in Rockland County. Is I found, luckily it was a big art location, and I had access. So I helped, I think it was 16, put together a tribe of my own, film, everything, all together, meeting in a regular basis and learning from each other and creating. So I think that this is a very exciting time. I'm sure it's happening elsewhere, but this is what I'm seeing here, and what I'm seeing is defining it. Also, remember that they have had access to Miami. There's almost a museum on every corner. When we opened MoCA in '96, we were it for the Contemporary Art Museum, basically. And there were others that did contemporary shows, but we were the Contemporary Art Museum. So then Art Miami, Art Basel, and the collectors and the private museums, all going up to Norton, you have this incredible access of being connected.
You are such an acclaimed curator and arts leader nationally, not just here in Florida. If you were giving advice to young artists who are, let's say they're in art school right now, or they're going to a state school and they're getting a degree in art, how would you tell them to move ahead with their career? What are the tips you would give them, or some advice you would give them that may not be expected?
Find your tribe. You need a circle of friends. What you out of art school, you're not going to have that regular critique and the kick in the rear that all of us need to say, no, you're not perfect. You need to be thinking of this, or did you think about that, or how come this isn't working? You need to find your support group that's going to take you out of beyond. Take the time in art school to really think about who and what you are and what you want to achieve in your work, because you might not have the time afterwards. Most of these art schools bring in, artists from all over to be visiting artists. Make those connections, continue those connections. A lot of the artists, the way they support themselves is to be art handlers. And it's probably the best way of knowing what's happening where, being in front of curators, getting to know other artists who are having exhibitions. So that's really great. And it does seem that on social media, it is to have the artists having to promote themselves. I prefer they promote their work and not themselves.
Yeah.
I'd rather see what they're creating than the person they're creating. But it is useful. I always have to see the work in person, and it's usually I will see the work and respond and like the work before I've ever met the artist. So it's really important that it's the art that can stand on its own.
One of the challenges that any arts leader today faces is the challenge of support and funding for the visions that they have. And it's a finite amount of resources in an area to support any project. What have you found to be the most successful ways to excite your supporters?
Well, I've often used the Tom Sawyer method. I make it look so exciting and so much fun. Everybody wants to join in. I've had some donors when I would say thank you, it's like, no, we thank you, that kind of thing. And you want people to really buy into what we're doing, and realizing they can make the difference, and they can make the difference at any level. I always tell my team, we can do this the hard way or the easy way. You decide. Is it the many small donations, or it's the few big donations? You figure out what's going to be the hard or easy way and the most efficient way to do it. We're very fortunate that we do have such a strong board. Not necessarily collectors, but love community, love education, love what we're doing, and also producing and being consistent and seeing that their support is making a huge impact.
So the last question I've asked everyone on this series is, if you could highlight, and perhaps we won't do art for your sake to spare anyone perceiving a bias, but if there's an artist or piece of art that you find particularly inspiring that you wish more people knew about, what would that be? Music, film, literature, could be visual art, dance, anything you like.
That's art. I like so much. I think just whatever I'm working on at the time, I like to say, look at this, isn't this amazing? Or if I'm seeing someone looking at it, I'm really excited and saying, like, what are you seeing in it? I'll give an example of when I guess I was 8 years old. My parents took me to the Museum of Modern Art, and I stood transfixed in front of a black Ed Reinhardt painting. And I was like completely taken. I could still see where it was hung in my mind and what I was seeing. And my parents saying, what are you looking at? And I kept saying, don't you see? Don't you see all the color in this? And no, they didn't. It was that kind of, like, I'd love it, be able to show people what I'm seeing, to get them, particularly to get away from what they think an artist is about. And that could even be for the artists themselves. People think they know what the artist is, and it keeps getting repeated and repeated. And even when I work with a well-known artist, I always wonder, what am I going to add to this? And then, I really just look at the work, look at patterns. What did the artist do consistently? What did they stop doing, and why? Why didn't that work for them? Why did they choose that path? And that's what, with anything, I like people. That's how I want people to approach the work, is to realize that it's a series of questioning that you do. First of all, you get that jolt, that important jolt, and then you start asking why. Why this? Why not that? And that's where the meaning comes from. And I want people to realize they could do it on their own. They don't have to be art historians. All it is a matter of thinking. I make it all up.
Bonnie Clearwater, we're so honored to have you join us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Luke. This is great. It's great to catch up with you.
Yes, you too.